Yeah. How about our time, folks? How we doing? It's about time.
1:30.
Yeah, it's about time to get started then, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so let's get started, I guess.
Everybody should.
Yeah, so if everybody mutes and except the speaker, we'll be in good shape here. First of all, welcome to all of you who have taken time to join us today. We really appreciate having you here. And again, it's wonderful to hear people, different places that have become aware of our organization. This is the beginning of the 36th year that we have been operating. And so we've been in this struggle a long time, obviously. Faye, Girsh, our founder, has kept us in that struggle all these years. And so, it's been wonderful for all of us to work with her. I have our program today, of course, really is really a report, in some sense, a discussion of issues that were raised at the most recent World Federation of Right to Die Societies that was recently held in Canada. And two of our speakers, Faye Girsh is one, of course, and Janet Hager is a board member of our organization, will be a second. We had intended to have a third speaker who's one of our members and very active with us, but unfortunately she had a death in the family and was unable to attend the meeting today. So that's the topic. And before we get started and let Faye and Janet take over the program, I wanted to make just a couple of announcements. First of all, be sure and tune into our next, if you're here in San Diego, be sure and plan to come to our February 18th Right to Die film series. The film is The Leisure Seeker, and it's going to be at the University Community Libraries, and the details of that film and the time are on our website. It's typically 2:00. I think it is 2:00 this time at the University Community Library.
By the way, if you can't come to the library, look it up. The Leisure Seeker. It's a wonderful movie.
Okay. And then just a couple more announcements before we get started. December is when our annual memberships expire. So if you haven't renewed yet your membership, please do. We rely upon memberships to help us bring you the programs that we do. Memberships and donations. I was just saying before we got on the program that we been so fortunate in the last couple months, last month in particular, received some really generous donations, mainly from people who have left us money in their will. So if you are so inclined and you really are committed to this this issue and this organization, consider leaving some amount to us in your will. It's an easy way to do it. You're not going to use that money anymore. Okay. And then a couple other announcements. One is just a kind of an alert about a group that you may or may not have heard of, but recently a group known as A Better Exit has formed here in California with the purpose of expanding the current End-of-Life Option Act in this state. California has an End-of-Life Option Act, much like other states, that is very, very limiting in terms of who can actually participate and enjoy the benefits of that act. In California, a state of 40 million, we have about 500 people at most who have used that law this past year. So you can see it's very restrictive, and we want to expand those people who can qualify for it. And so if you're interested in learning more about that, go to a website called abetterexit.org and check out the opportunities to get involved in that fight. It's really worth doing. And then finally, I think my last announcement is just to remind people to keep their mics off so that background noise from your dog or who knows what doesn't come through into the presentations. And so if you can keep those mics off, it'd be a big help. I think those are the main announcements that I was supposed to make here before we get started. So if I've forgotten anything, I'm sure Faye will pick me up and make those final things I've forgotten. Otherwise, I'm going to let Faye start by telling you, you know, a little bit about today's program, and then her and Janet can inform you, and then we'll have at the end of Faye's presentation, we'll have a 5 minutes of questions if you'll submit them via the chat line. 5 minutes of questions. At the end of Janet's presentation, we'll have 5 minutes of questions, and you submit those via the chat line. And then anybody who wants to ask a question and couldn't or didn't feel comfortable using the chat line can use the raise your hand function on Zoom, and we'll get to those questions at the end of the program, where we typically have 15, 20 minutes, maybe even a half hour of time to chat with people about their questions. So that's the program. And without any further ado, Faye, take it away.
I'm hoping that you can see what's on my screen. Nope, I just left. I just messed. I'm sorry. I don't want to mess this up, but I'm doing a good job so far.
You had it on there.
I had it on there and I just lost it. Sorry, I think I'll have to go back and find it again. I don't know what happened. Sorry, I apologize. See if I can talk and figure this out at the same time. What I wanted to say is the World Federation of Right to Die Societies is an international group based, I guess, in the Netherlands, in the sense that the director is a Dutch doctor. And it's been in existence since 1980. And it was founded actually by our founder, Derek Humphrey. I have pictures of this on my slides. So if you'll excuse me, talk to each other. Janet, maybe you want to say something while I get back.
I wonder, Faye, if maybe Janet would like to go first, and then you could come second, and that would give you time to put your slides together. Would that work?
Yeah, I just had them together and I lost them. So sure, by all means, Janet, go ahead.
Okay.
Janet,
Yeah, and sure, I can certainly start. And as long as Faye, you may need to take your screen down.
I
Yeah.
might.
Stop screen sharing, Faye. Okay.
There we go.
Now,
Okay.
Janet can
Now let me try. Let's see if I can do this.
When you're this old, technical stuff doesn't work too well.
Okay, can you see mine?
No, we see you, Janet, but we don't see your screen.
Okay. Well, let me try again. So, hang on just a second. There, I think it was because Faye's were still up. So let me try again.
Okay, there we go. We see a screen.
All right. Now, can you see my slides?
Yes, yeah, we can.
Okay. There. So
Yeah.
my name is Janet Hager, and I'm on the board of directors for Hemlock Society of San Diego. And I attended the World Federation Conference for the first time in November. As a first-time attendee, it was a bit intimidating to be among the world leaders in the Right to Die movement, like Faye, who was an absolute celebrity at the conference. Many of these folks know each other, and they tended to gather and socialize together. So I really had to stretch outside of my comfort zone to introduce myself and start a conversation. We all wore these name badges, but not knowing anyone, I would have really liked to have had a person's country listed with their name. That would have been a helpful icebreaker for me. So one of the very first lessons I learned from attending this conference was not to miss the General Assembly Day. When I registered for the conference, it looked like the General Assembly Day was going to be primarily business stuff. So I went to Niagara Falls instead. And you can tell from my photos that it was a beautiful day at the falls, but I later found out that there were some very good discussions held during the General Assembly meeting. So note to self, do not miss the General Assembly. Because Canada was the host country for the conference, many of the presentations were specific to their MAID provisions, experiences, and affiliate organizations that have been established to support their law. For instance, there was a presentation from a physician who provided the first MAID death for someone whose sole diagnosis was dementia. And she provided the details of everything that she had documented. And then she underwent a year of governmental scrutiny before being cleared of any wrongdoing. And there were two organizations. One was called Bridge C14, and C14 because their law for medical aid in dying is C14. And then Bridge for You. And they presented how their organizations provide peer support for practitioners who are providing MAID, for individuals who are considering MAID, and for loved ones who have lost someone via MAID. There was also a presentation by MAID House, which is a facility in Toronto where those who are eligible to receive MAID can have the procedure with their chosen provider in a safe, reliable, and comfortable space. My takeaways about Canada's medical aid in dying is that while it's one of the most progressive in the world, and we've certainly talked about it a lot because it is progressive and inclusive, and it's come about quickly. I mean, it really just has been in place since 2016, but it's a bit confusing, even to those who are MAID providers. And I know that because I ate some breakfasts and some lunches with those MAID providers in Canada, and even amongst themselves, there's confusion. And as I saw it, there are multiple reasons for the confusion. First is that they have a two-track system. And track one is for those whose death is reasonably foreseeable, which is more straightforward and closer to what we have here in California. Track two is for those whose death isn't reasonably foreseeable, which requires a longer, more complex relationship between the patient and the provider.
Janet, excuse me, MAID is medical aid in dying. People don't know what MAID means.
Okay. Then there's what Canada calls a waiver for final consent. And this came about because a woman whose name was Audrey Parker, who was living in Nova Scotia, was dying of metastatic breast cancer. And she had metastatic disease to her brain. And near the end of her death, Christmas was approaching, and she really wanted to live through Christmas, but she was afraid that her brain mets might make it so she didn't have mental capacity to provide her final consent after Christmas. So she ended up utilizing medical aid in dying before Christmas. And the law was eventually expanded to provide people who otherwise qualify for MAID a waiver that they could receive medical aid in dying at a point in the future, even if they didn't have full mental capacity at that time. At the time of the conference in November, Canada was planning on adding people with a sole diagnosis of mental health disease to be able to be assessed for medical aid in dying, which was going to begin this coming March. And this would have really further complicated things. And I don't know if you all have seen, there's been a lot of articles in newspapers about the Canadian system and how I think it all stems from this, that they're going to add mental health diseases, and it's really got the opponents riled up. So, however, as of December, Canada's federal government started negotiating on an extension to the March 17th, 2023 date. And there's no new date mentioned as of this time. So they're still working on that. But when and if they start to do this, it's going to really complicate things more for them. The other complication is that they don't have enough MAID providers. So among those providers that were recently surveyed, many aren't going to continue to provide medical aid in dying, secondary to having too much of a workload, being poorly reimbursed, and not receiving enough support. So Canada's medical aid in dying is progressive and inclusive, but it's complicated. And by contrast, the Netherlands medical aid in dying, which they actually refer to as euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide, sounded more straightforward and less problematic. They have officially tolerated euthanasia practice since 1985, which led to a makeshift law in 1994 and a fully fledged euthanasia law in 2002. So in the most recent year that they have statistics in 2021, there were 7,666 people that obtained physician-assisted suicide, which accounted for 4.5% of the deaths in the Netherlands that year. 90% of those deaths were provided by the patient's general practitioner. So this is primarily a decision between a person and their longtime doctor. And that's a model that I really like. Also, in the Netherlands, their media generally supports euthanasia. And that's huge because I don't think our media supports medical aid in dying. Their advocacy group is called NVVE, and it has a membership of 174,000 people. And so just to put this number into perspective, the population of the Netherlands is about 17.5 million people, which is approximately half of the population of California. So just imagine if the Hemlock Society of San Diego had a membership of 350,000 people. NVA holds a chair position at the University of Amsterdam, which is huge. They're influencing, training programs and curriculum that's available at the university. They provide a teacher in the general practitioner training program, and they provide lectures to an array of healthcare providers. A country that provides medical aid in dying that really fascinated me is Colombia. And I think it's because they are the only country in all of South America to provide medical aid in dying. Again, they use the terminology euthanasia and assisted suicide. Apparently, Uruguay is getting closer to having euthanasia or assisted suicide. But, as of September of this past year, their lower house passed a euthanasia bill. But as best I can tell on internet searches, that bill hasn't passed the upper house yet. And there's also chatter about Argentina obtaining euthanasia or assisted suicide, but I also wasn't able to confirm that they have passed a law as of yet. So that makes Colombia the only country in all of South America with an official law, and they have a large Catholic population. The Colombia group provided a presentation by a woman named Camila Salazar, and she's a lawyer, and she's also holds a master's degree in journalism. She looked like a teenager. Lots of people look like teenagers to me, but she looked like a teenager. But she has very impressive credentials. Although I had to giggle because with all that she's accomplished, she didn't get her visa in order to be able to attend the meeting in person. So she had to provide her presentation on Zoom, and she was the only presenter that had to present on Zoom. But she spoke about how Colombia was able to eliminate the requirement of having a terminal illness from their law in 2021. And it was primarily through the cases of two women that had ALS, Yolanda Shapiro and Martha Sepulveda. So these two women helped to change the way the media talks about euthanasia and self-determined deaths in Colombia. Both of these women were articulate and confident. Their focus was on legal rights, not moral issues, which was huge for a Catholic country. And they helped journalists understand the big picture so that they could get press releases from the legal perspective. They also focused on autonomy and freedom, not on pain and suffering. So it was more of a completed life perspective. Another focus they had was on the expression of consent. These were confident women who weren't desperate. They were just simply expressing that this is what they wanted. And the other point that Camila Salazar really drove home was that you have to be loud. They obtained primetime TV slots to tell Yolanda's and Martha's stories, and they put pressure on politicians. Another presentation that I enjoyed was given by Colin Brewer, who's a retired psychiatrist in the United Kingdom, and he's been very active in the Right to Die movement since 1978. He talked about the pharmacology and physiology of medical aid in dying around the world. The majority of countries providing medical aid in dying have IV administration. Research shows that patients prefer physicians administer the medication by IV. with most countries using pentobarbital, which is a barbiturate typically used as a sedative, a pre-anesthetic, and to control convulsions. In high doses, it causes death by respiratory arrest, and it is what's used in the United States for veterinary euthanasia and by some states in the federal government for executions of convicted criminals by lethal injection. But instead of using pentobarbital for medical aid in dying in the United States, we, in the jurisdictions where it's allowed, we're using a complicated 5-drug formula that has to be swallowed or introduced somewhere within the gastrointestinal tract. And while death can occur in 30 minutes, it can also take hours, particularly for someone who has poor absorption within their gastrointestinal tract. Using monitoring equipment, which was primarily EKG readings and pulse oximetry readings, Dr. Brewer conducted research on the death of individuals at Pegasus in Switzerland, using pentobarbital IV injection by way of self-administration, with the patient either turning a dial or pushing a button to administer the flow of pentobarbital. He found that unconsciousness occurred in 1 to 2 minutes, and then 10 seconds later, only 10 seconds later, respiration ceased. And 45 to 80 seconds later, cardiac arrest occurred, secondary to hypoxia, which is just a lack of oxygen. So with IV pentobarbital, death occurs in about 4 minutes max, while what we have available in the United States typically takes 30 minutes to a few hours, but it can take even longer. Another interesting talk was given by Mary Ewart, who's the executive director of Final Exit Network, or FEN. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this organization. She presented research that FEN conducted on the psychosocial reasons for hastening death. And they looked at 2 different groups. So the first group was what they called a supporter group, which was made up of FEN members who support a hastened death. And the second group was a decided group, which was comprised of irremediably ill people who had gone through FEN's application process. Both groups were asked to rate the importance of 13 factors covering physical, cognitive, emotional, and social issues, influencing their thoughts on why they would hasten death. The decided group had 2 reasons for considering a hastened death that were statistically significantly higher that influenced their thinking. The first was the lack of any acceptable medical treatment to improve their quality of life. And second was the prospect of moving into a nursing home. The supporter group had thought that pain and feeling ill would be the strongest factors, but these ranked much lower by the decided group. So it turns out that inadequate pain control does not necessarily lessen people's desire to hasten their own death when compared to health conditions that take away their autonomy and their meaningful existence. And these factors are now influencing FEN's criteria to those who reach out to them for help. A country that I found interesting that doesn't have assisted dying, which is their terminology, is Iceland. And with a population of only 372,000, I see them as a microcosm of what other countries that have medical aid in dying and other countries that are trying to get medical aid in dying have gone through. So their advocacy group is called Livsverding. I don't know how you pronounce that, but that's their advocacy group. And it was founded in 2017. They have 190 members with 3,900 Facebook followers. They've done all of the standard work. They've attended meetings and conferences. They've written numerous articles. They've conducted interviews. And they've had meetings with politicians, associations of nurses, physicians, clergy, and disabled groups. And they've also conducted multiple surveys among both their general population and among physicians and nurses. So let's first look at the surveys that they did among the general population. And it found that 76% of people were in favor of assisted dying for those with an unbearable and incurable disease or condition Didn't have to be a disease. It could be a condition, some type of disability. And 82% would want assisted dying if they had an unbearable and incurable disease or condition. The difference between these two numbers isn't great, but I still thought it was funny that they weren't the same number. And it kind of points to human nature that if somebody else has an unbearable and incurable disease, that yes, we'd want to have this, but if I have that unbearable or incurable disease, then I definitely want to have physician-assisted death. So that made me giggle that those two numbers aren't the same. And the reason given against assisted dying for those who don't believe in it were that there could be a risk of abuse, and that was for about 47% of the people. So kind of the biggest group felt that it would go against their moral values for 22%. It would go against the ethical and professional obligations of physicians for about 18%. 12% felt that palliative care should be sufficient to alleviate suffering, and only 1% objected for religious reasons. I don't really know the religious makeup of Iceland, but that surprised me that that percentage was so low. Maybe if you combine that number with the 22% because of moral values, maybe those two go hand in hand a little bit more. Among the general population, the method of delivery that they would want, 48% would want the physician to administer an IV injection, 26% would want the individual to self-administer the medication provided by a physician, and the remaining balance didn't answer. And if we look at these same things among the surveys they did with physicians and nurses, it revealed that 54% of physicians and 71% of nurses are in favor of assisted dying, with greater support among general practitioners than specialists. Only 18% were not in favor of assisted death under any circumstances. And within this 18% of physicians and nurses that were against assisted dying, their reasons ranged from killing people is not in line with the goals of nursing or medicine for 60%, and that it can never morally become the patient's right or the doctor's duty to use aid in dying before a natural death occurs for about 42%. As far as the method of administration, 14% of physicians and nurses felt the physician should administer an IV injection to the individual, and 20% felt that the individual should self-administer the drug provided by a physician, and 40% felt the physician should either give an injection or provide a prescription for the individual to self-administer. So again, to me, that's really remarkable that physicians, nearly 55% feel that either an injection or, make it the patient's preference. Which would you prefer, an IV injection or to self-administer? So the majority of the population and medical providers in Iceland are in support of assisted dying, but they don't have this available yet. And that was kind of my, that was kind of my overall conclusion of this conference, was that the Right to Die movement was a very difficult process to navigate. And while there are several countries that have been able to attain laws allowing medical aid in dying in some form, there are many more countries that have been trying to get medical aid in dying, some for decades, without any success. Now, I don't end on this note to be discouraging. I don't think that we should shrug our shoulders or throw our hands up in the air. What if folks like Derek Humphrey and Faye Girsh had done that back in the 1980s and 1990s? We might not have medical aid in dying now in the 11 jurisdictions in the US where it is available. Instead, I challenge each of us to do what Camila Salazar from Colombia suggests: get loud. And each of us should explore what that means for us. Do we get a bit more courageous to talk with our family members and friends about death and what we might want for ourselves at the end of our lives? Do we encourage those same family members and friends who express some like-mindedness with us to become members of the Hemlock Society of San Diego, or the Completed Life Initiative, or a Better Exit? Do we give our time and energy to become volunteers in these movements? Do we give monies we may have set aside for charitable contributions to these organizations so that they can continue the fight. For those of you who are joining us from outside of California, in a state that currently doesn't have medical aid in dying, perhaps Compassion and Choices is a good place for you to provide donations, as their goal is to get the current model that is present in the 11 jurisdictions in the US that have medical aid in dying in every state within the US. For those of you joining us from within California who think that our End of Life Option Act is too restrictive, perhaps your donation money might be better placed in organizations that are trying to expand our current law, which Compassion and Choices isn't committed to doing. Just some things to think about as I conclude my presentation today. And so I will now turn things over to Faye.
I think we have
Actually,
time for questions.
Well, that's right. We've got time for questions.
And we do have a question, Janet. It states mental health disease definition. What conditions does this include?
Well, you know, I think that Faye, as a psychologist, can probably answer that question better than I can. But it's going to be, you know, people with schizophrenia and bipolar disease that don't have any other type of disease. Faye, you want to speak to that more?
Well, formally, you're talking about mental illness, not the way you put it is a sort of an unorthodox way of putting it, but mental illness. And usually those diseases, disorders are covered in DSM-3, DSM-5 now, put out by the American Psychiatric Association. But generally, we're talking about people who are plagued by something going wrong with their mental state that prevents them from functioning normally in this world. There are treatments, but they're not always successful. I think many of you in the audience know more about mental health. The point is that people suffer horribly sometimes from prolonged depression. I have a good friend who suffers terribly from bipolar disease, and the treatments are not helping too much. Schizophrenia, as Janet said, there's a lot of them. And the reason this law may be held up in Canada, and it may not go into effect in March, is because of the problems with defining this. At one time, Final Exit Network said that it would help people with mental illness, and the criteria were very strict, that they had to have hospitalized, they have to have been some documentation that they had treatments for certain numbers of periods and all that kind of thing. So there is a way of documenting it, but it does open a Pandora's box. And a lot of the opposition now, which was latent all the time, is coming up because of the new possibility. And in Canada, the Parliament continues to look at this law and has been revising it for the better, by the way, every 2 years. And so that's what's happening in March. And they also may include mature minors, which some countries do also. Long story. Janet, that was a marvelous presentation. I'm so glad you went first. It was so much more coherent than mine, as you'll see.
Oh,
I see a hand. It looks like Nina.
Great.
Well,
We've got
Nina,
more.
hi, Nina.
Hi. I was wondering if now that Colombia has passed their law, do they, like Switzerland, accept people traveling there for?
Only Switzerland accepts
no, they
foreigners.
don't.
Still on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Nina's my neighbor.
We have about 5 or 6 more questions in the chat.
Yeah, let me read one of them. This comes from Dolores. She says, I talked with a young woman from Canada who was depressed and seeking help. When she phoned for help, she was advised suicide. Was this type of counseling discussed? And this, I think, ties into the issue of how controversial mental illnesses are in Canada, and some of the issues that have come out of that debate. And maybe, Janet, you want to talk a little bit about that, since you were talking about Canada. Obviously, we can't, who would know where she was advised suicide, by whom, et cetera. That's, so I'll let you speak to that, Janet, if you want to.
Well, anyone who's going to apply for medical aid in dying, no matter their diagnosis in Canada, has to be assessed by providers. And I don't know what provisions they're looking at, if and when they end up allowing folks who have a sole diagnosis of mental health disease, whether or not they'll need to have a psychiatric or psychologist evaluate them. There were actually several psychiatrists from Canada that had come to the meeting. So I think they're all searching for more information. So I don't know what they're going to require. Do you, Faye, know what they're going to, as they look at this expanded?
No, I don't. But, there's suicide. We don't have a real good word for wanting to die because of suffering. And suicide is a word that's sometimes used, for example, in Switzerland, physician-assisted suicide. It's a perfectly good word. Derek Humphrey continues to use it. It's self-killing. And most of us think that there are forms of rational suicide that can be justifiably helped because the suffering has become unbearable for those people. And then there's irrational suicide, like my girlfriend left me yesterday, or I don't know, that may be rational, I don't know. And people use violent methods. They throw themselves off trains and off buildings and eat poison and terrible methods. And that point of the Right to Die movement is to give people who do need to end their lives for what somebody else considers a rational reason, a peaceful, gentle death surrounded by people that they love. So suicide is a loaded term that really applies to some people who are suffering horribly. And I would imagine that it applies to most people who end their lives by suicide. And the thing is that there are better methods than these violent methods that people generally use to end their lives. For instance, using a gun is the most popular method, if you want to say, of ending one's life. And the largest group that does this is white men over 85. And you can well imagine that this group of people has also concomitant diseases like dementia, heart disease, and stuff like that, who would be eligible for a broader assisted suicide law than we have. So maybe someday we'll do a program on what is suicide and who is doing it. And we are strong believers in suicide prevention, but we also would like to be able to counsel people, and if they really have a good reason for suicide, teach them more nonviolent methods. Long story, sorry.
We have another question from Dina Buck for you, Janet. What organizations in the US are currently working on expanding the right to die laws?
Well, I know that New Hampshire, End of Life New Hampshire, they don't have a law yet, but they are trying, when they get their law, to have it be more inclusive, more expanded than what's currently available in the other 11 jurisdictions. I know that here in California, A Better Exit is looking to expand the law in 3 very specific ways to eliminate the terminal diagnosis. So somebody that has longer than 6 months to live, they're asking that there be an injectable option, and as well as the ingested option, and that for people with early to mid-stage dementia be allowed to be assessed, and if they have mental capacity to be allowed to use medical aid in dying.
I would say Final Exit Network has, I founded the Final Exit, me and Derek Humphrey co-founded Final Exit Network. I'm very proud of that accomplishment in my life. And Final Exit Network goes beyond these requirements to helping people who have different requirements in a different way. The only reason we have the kind of laws we have now that require doctors and medical intervention is because the kind of drugs that people would take to have a peaceful death are prescribed by doctors. Whether this should be a medical procedure or not has been debated a long time in this movement, and Final Exit Network has made it not a medical procedure. It stemmed from the program I started when I was head of the National Hemlock Society called the Caring Friends Program. It is not a medical model. It has already gone beyond the requirements of the law that we have.
I think,
There's one hand up and then I'll let you go.
can I respond just a little bit more to that one of the last questions about what other organizations are attempting to expand the law, End of Life Option Act in California in particular? I think the striking thing that has hit me over the years I've been associated with Hemlock Society and paying attention to these issues is how few organizations that are in the right to die field in general are actually pushing to expand the limits of the law, that are actually attempting to get laws that are more along the lines of what we see in places like Canada or the Netherlands. And it's striking to me, it's shocking to me in some ways that there aren't more organizations in this country that are pushing to expand the limits of these very conservative laws that are being formulated and put together and ultimately passed in other states by groups like Compassion and Choices, because that there's a crying need for such an effort. I think that's what the emphasis is behind this recently formed group, A Better Exit, that we've mentioned here in this talk so far. It's unique.
People ask, I'm sorry, go ahead, Barry, sorry.
No,
People ask, what's the difference between Hemlock and Compassion and Dying? Compassion and Choices, I mean, Compassion Dying is the organization they originally had. The difference is we look at all possible alternatives, and our meetings are about everything that you can do to have a peaceful death. Compassion and Choices will only talk about this very restrictive model and has withdrawn as a member of the World Federation of Right to Die Societies because of all the other organizations in that group, in that federation, that go way beyond the laws that we have in the United States. I mean, Compassion Choice done a lot of very good work, but I think their narrow-minded focus on this is not helpful to most people who need a peaceful death.
We have another question for you, Janet, from Bruce Batchelor. Does the Veteran Administration have a position on physician-assisted death?
Yes, they can't do it.
Yeah, it's the VA is a federal program. And so they do not provide medical aid in dying, because the medical aid in dying bills or laws that are in place in the United States are all state run. They don't have anything to do with the federal government.
The same reason Medicare won't pay for it.
Right.
Another question from Patricia Fisher. I'd be interested in hearing more about the inquisition that the first provider of MAID to a dementia patient went through and what criteria they used to exonerate her.
She didn't go into all of the specifics, but she did a lot of video recording with the patient, so that it was really well documented that this was what the patient wanted. She also included a lot of specialists, neurologists, to get their take on whether or not she was eligible and knew what she was asking for. I don't know what governmental scrutiny she went through, but it took a year of I think her providing information and them looking through it, and before they made the decision that she had not done anything wrong. She had followed their law.
That question's from Pat Fisher, who was our first executive assistant, and very, very up on this movement. I have 15 minutes to present. Should I start?
Oh, yeah, that's what I was thinking, that probably we ought to jump to your presentation, Faye, and then we'll have time for more questions after that. Did you get
And Janet, if I get screwed up again, continue to talk, because you know everything I know and better.
Not true.
Okay,
So
let's
Faye,
see.
take it away with your talk, and let's see if we can't get your screen.
I need to be enabled to do screen sharing. I need to be co-hosted.
Yeah, you are co-host.
it says host disabled participant screen sharing, so I can't do it.
Just double check. I'll make you a co-host
Sorry.
again.
I had to go off a couple of
Yeah.
times to make
Okay,
this
well,
work.
let's see if this will work. Now you're a co-host.
Oh, let's see what happens here.
There you go.
Okay, something about closed captioning here. Okay, so I'm going to give a little history in this slide. It's too much detail, but I just want to say that the World Federation of Right to Die Societies is now comprised of 58 Right to Die societies around the world, although there are 80, and some don't belong, like Compassion and Choices. Derek Humphrey, the founder of the Hemlock Society, was one of the co-founders of the World Federation of Right to Die Societies, along with the Japan Society for Death with Dignity, one of our largest Right to Die organizations, the first one in Asia, but does not have even a living will law, to say nothing of medical aid in dying. It's very strange what happens in Japan. So the purpose is to aid communication between Right to Die organizations to facilitate getting the laws passed. And 30 countries, 30 of the 58 countries that have Right to Die societies are members of the World Federation. And we usually meet formally in these kind of conferences every other year. We didn't meet during COVID. And we meet alternately in Europe, because that's where most of the organizations are, and then somewhere else, like Japan, like the United States, and Canada. Me, I guess, when I was president of the National Hemlock Society, hosted the conference in Boston in the year 2000, and then I hosted with Final Exit Network in 2016 when we met in Chicago. Generally, the programs last about 4 days. The first day is, as Janet said, is a business meeting, which used to be super boring. And this year was definitely very interesting. And then sometimes the last day we do new technologies for self-deliverance, in which some of us who are interested in expanding the technologies get together and talk about that. We'll do that this time, but what Janet talked about, Colin Brewer's presentation, was a lot like we used to have in New Tech. And out of New Tech, by the way, which Derek again started, was the helium method, then the nitrogen method, and the methods that we now use generally for people who don't use the regular law. The members of the World Federation of Right to Die Society are member organizations. They're not people. And finally, I got them to agree that we could have supporters, a class of people who could join the World and not have voting privileges, which really doesn't matter at all. But if you want to join, they have a very good website, World Federation of Right to Die Societies. And they have a very good staff now, fortunately, thanks to people's contributions. They keep us well informed of things that are going on in this world. And they encourage people. Rob Jonquier, who's been the president of this for a long time, and you'll see his picture in a minute. He was a doctor in the Netherlands, and he helped people die long before there was a law passed. I have great admiration for Rob, and he's done a great job of heading the World Federation. And there's Derek's picture. In case you don't know who our founder is, there is Derek Humphrey, who just got out of the hospital, says he feels much better. He's 93. And of course, his most famous book is Final Exit, but he's written probably 12 different books. This is the World Federation board. I don't know when. I'm just making up a date. I can't remember when it was. But there's Derek. And a lot of you remember Dick McDonald, and this guy's from Colombia. He is, by the way, not only the president of the Colombia, he's dead now, president of the Colombia Right to Die Society, which is very strong, but he was also president of the Medical Society of Colombia. We have a lot of doctors involved in this movement. Here's a doctor from Japan. Here's a doctor from Great Britain, wonderful doctor. This guy's a legislator in the Netherlands. This is me and other people. So this is what our board sort of looks like. Not anymore. I'm not on it anymore. But what I love about the conference is, of course, I've been so involved in this for a long time that I love to see old people, old friends, to make new friends. I've made a lot of new friends at this conference in Toronto, to hear people's new ideas, because it's very easy to get stuck in our old ideas. There are people that I admire so much because they're so courageous. So when I go to these conferences, there are people that I really love. And because they're in different cities, it's a wonderful way to get around. I put all my travel money, not all of it, but put a lot of my travel money into these biennial conferences, because you get escorted. Usually, we didn't have it in Toronto, but usually there's a trip around the city or something that you learn a variety of new approaches, as you'll see very briefly here. Chance to hang out with people, a chance to know that our movement is universal. We are not just trying to change the law in San Diego or California or the United States, but around the world. This is a problem, that people do not die well, and that people would like more of a choice in how they end their lives. And then I did a lot of sort of on the street interviews with people who were at the conference. I used to edit the World Federation of Right to Die newsletter, which I have to say it was really very good. And it went to our members all around the world. And it came out monthly, and it is looking through them today. I was looking through them, and it's a very good history of our movement and, of course, of our organization. I have to say that in 2006, Toronto again was the site. I mean, the first time was the site of the World Federation meeting. This is their the very nice flyer that they had. And then, of course, they agreed to host it last year. And if we ever wanted to do it in San Diego, it would be a major production, but it's a thought, and people would love to come to San Diego, especially in the winter. So this is another board that I was on. I just want to mention that these are where people are from: Colombia, France, United States. Ted Goodwin, I don't talk about him later. The UK, Canada, Australia, Belgium, these two people, and Japan. So we try to get as varied a membership on the board as possible. I was counting up, I'd never counted up before, how many World Federation meetings I'd been to. So I was president of the organization, and I was the newsletter editor. And then a couple of years ago, I got the Seguin Award, named after Marilyn Seguin, who was a pioneer in Canada. And as I said, I hosted and co-hosted the meetings in Boston and Chicago. But this is where some of the meetings were. Well, I guess all of them that I remember. And Japan has hosted very elegantly and beautifully and hospitably meetings twice, although they do not believe in euthanasia, and they do not even have a living will law. Japan is a complete enigma to me, even though I live there, but I do not understand what goes on there. They have over 125,000 members of Japan Society for Death with Dignity. Lovely people. Well, one thing they do is they have their own living will law that is respected all over the country, because there is no official living will law. So a lot of people join so they can use their advance directive. So Switzerland has hosted Chicago. That's the one that Final Exit Network and Hemlock Society of San Diego co-hosted. San Francisco was one of the first meetings that I went to that Derek hosted. We met in Cape Town a couple of years ago. There is a very lively organization in South Africa. Brussels, of course, and Belgium. I think we've had 2 meetings in Belgium. In Netherlands, we've had a couple of meetings. So that's the thing to do. So if you want to become interested in this and look at their website and contribute and become a supporter, you can go to the next meeting in Dublin in 2024. It's too bad that it's every other year, but some of us can't afford to go more often. I just, somebody not from us put up the slide up that the worldwide Right to Die movement has greatly evolved since 1975, when Derek Humphrey helped his wife, who was dying from breast cancer, to take her life. Many of us who belong to the Hemlock Society now don't realize what Derek has done, the courage that he's shown, the forward-looking ideas that he's had, the fact that he's written probably 12 different books on this issue, and has made it a major issue and then founded the Hemlock Society too. So I'm just saying that somebody has acknowledged Derek. And then he said the ethical foundation then, as it is now, is grounded in a humane belief that persons should be allowed freely to determine when, where, and how they want to die. So the World Federation has no bias for any restrictive laws or any unrestricted laws or anything. It just, this is what the goal is. And that's why I love it so much. This is Rob Jonkier, who is the executive director and, as I said, was a doctor in the Netherlands. And I think he's done a wonderful job. He and I went to Mexico City a couple of years ago to tell them why they should have a law. We both made speeches. His was better than mine, but he's really a terrific advocate. This is Asun Alvarez, who is currently the president. She just got her second term. She is a psychologist at the medical school in Mexico City. Very capable, very lovely, wonderful woman, strong advocate. This is Kelsey Goforth, who is also wonderful. Everybody's wonderful. She is the CEO or something of Death with Dignity Canada, which is the national organization that sponsors this meeting and advocates for the expansion of the law, as opposed to our national organization, Compassion Choices, which continues to advocate for contraction of the law. I mean, that's the way I see it anyway. But Death with Dignity Canada has been extremely supportive of all their organizations and of trying to help with this law. She's very good. And they have periodic public meetings like we do that are on Zoom that you can tune into. Just go to their website, which is Death with Dignity Canada. These are two of our main lawyers in the country that were in our country that were there at the meeting. Dad Pope, I think many of you know as the leading authority on the law in the United States and the right to die movement nationally, internationally, I would say. And David Hoffman, who is on the board of the Completed Life Initiative. Both are law school professors. I interviewed them both, and that was fun to do that, although there's a lot of background noise. Erica Preissig is a physician who started Life Circle as an alternative to Dignitas. She used to work at Dignitas, and then she started her own organization. She's now sort of contracted because she's been, I'm sorry to say, involved in a lot of lawsuits that have sort of discouraged her, but it's her brother that started Pegasus. So I can't remember, Janet, whether you talked about the two main organizations in Switzerland that we refer people to, and that's Pegasus and Dignitas. And here's the head of Dignitas, but oh no, where is he? Lost him. Anyway, that's Sylvan Lully. He's spoken to us. His speech is on our website. And Dignitas is the oldest organization, right to die organization in Switzerland. I just want to mention that if you're Swiss, you have access to their national organization, which is called Exit. I think just Exit. Very confusing, all these names. And everybody in Switzerland can belong to this organization. And then if you want to die, they will come and help you die. I interviewed the man whom I love dearly, who's head of it. And when I was finished with the interview, he said, "I'm sorry, but you're going to put this on the internet. And I don't want my picture or my name identified." So I'm sorry to say that even in Switzerland, there are people who are serious enemies of our movement who threaten our workers there. And this is true, by the way, of the head of Pegasus, whom I interviewed too. And when I finished the interview, he did not want his interview shown. I'm sorry to say, because it was very good. Here's a guy from Brazil, young guy. His mother died in Life Circle when Erica was still taking patients. And he wrote a book about it, but it's in Portuguese. So if anybody can translate from Portuguese, I thought my daughter's daughter-in-law could, but she's not interested. So I'm trying to find a translator for him. This is Pascal Landau, who I think father was a member, active member of the organization, and he started his own organization in France called A Vivre. I don't know what happened to Sylvan's picture, but Sylvan Lully, well, it was around somewhere. This young lawyer from South Korea gave a wonderful talk, and she started this organization, Korean Association of Right to Die, which makes it the second Asian organization. And she was very competent. This guy is, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, Pienda, who is an emergency room physician in New Zealand. And he made a very strong pitch, I think twice, that there should be less bureaucracy in this law, that when he tries to use it in New Zealand, it requires so many steps that it's not like a normal medical procedure, which he thinks it should be. This is Richard Zane, who keeps showing up. His claim to fame, as far as I'm concerned, is we had a very strong advocate who worked a long time with Derek, John Hofsis. And John went to, I think, Pegasus to die, and Richard accompanied him. And it takes a little guts to accompany people to their death, and the legalities of it are still in question, even in this country in which nobody's ever been prosecuted for it. But they have in New Zealand. Just somebody was recently prosecuted in Scotland, and it was happening a lot in the United Kingdom until they passed a law that at least restricted who can be prosecuted. This is Jane Morris. She was very eloquent spokesperson for Australia. And as you'll see later, Australia, we need to celebrate what just happened in Australia. In the last few months, the Australia consists of 6 states and 2 territories. The 6 states finally took 27 years, but all 6 states now have what they call a VAD law, voluntary assisted dying law. The first one was in Victoria, which actually has one of the strongest advocacy groups, but is the most restrictive because it was the first. They'll change it, I'm sure. In our country, we do not change the law. Every time a new state passes the law, it gets to be the same law. 6 months self-administration is in every single law. We don't seem to make any changes. A few changes. In New Mexico is the most recent state, and they changed it because now nurse practitioners can also be involved in administering the law. But otherwise, those 2 restrictions, self-administration, 6 months, get put in each law, which seems to be a problem to me. This woman, young woman from Canada, her husband died using MAID, and she's eating what we get to eat there twice a day at least, breakfast and lunch. The food was very good, I think. Janet, you agree?
I do agree. They fed us well.
Yeah, I thought it was terrific and plentiful. There's Rudy, who is head of Pegasus, but he doesn't want his picture shown. There's Sylvan, who is head of Dignitas. There he is. And he does want his picture shown. He's quite wonderful. He's a human rights attorney, as was the founder of Dignitas, who is still alive and very courageous man, in my opinion. Stephanie said, let's hug. So I took her picture hugging. That's Stephanie Green, who has spoken to us. Both of her speeches are on our website. She's the author of This is Assisted Dying, which you haven't read, you should. She carefully explains what it is she does and what other providers do, assessors and providers. She founded CAMAP, which is the Canadian Association of Medical Assessors and Providers, or something like that. And so she's a medical doctor. She was a gynecologist. I love her. She's wonderful. Here she is wearing green, so people will know that she's Stephanie Green. Here's another person I love. Peggy Batten has been writing about this since, well, I guess she and Derek started at the same time. She's a professor of philosophy at University of Utah, and wrote some of the most forward-looking stuff, books and treatises and everything else, continues to be very active in the movement. And sometimes after the meetings, we go and hang out together. Like in the Netherlands, we went around Holland together, and we've gone to Mexico together. And so she was my roommate this time. I love getting in touch with her once every 2 years. She looks like she's saying something obscene. I doubt that. This is Pam, who was supposed to be with us today, except for the death in the family. I was very glad that she came. So there were three of us from the Hemlock Society of San Diego. Pam has a lot to say. She went to different events than we did. So I hope someday you'll hear her version of how the World Federation was to her. This is Mary Ganapole, who is in Arizona, very hard worker, has some very good ideas. And sometimes she hangs out with the Hemlock Society of San Diego. This is the delegate from End of Life Ireland. I can't remember her name. She was adorable. Here's an organization that just started and is hosting the 2024 meeting. I think it's marvelous. So it'll be in Dublin, where she is. I won't go into Philip Nitschke, but Philip Nitschke is not usually attends the World Federation meeting, although he's not very beloved by many of the members, and is having his own meeting in Dublin in April. In case you're interested, I'm sure you can go. You know, I can't remember Jürgen's whole name, and I'll fill that in. But he gave a very impassioned speech about the problems with the bureaucracy in our laws and how we keep trying to change these laws and result in making them bureaucratic when they should not be. It was really a very good presentation. And here's somebody who is an advocate, as you can imagine. I just want to say that we know that the law in Canada is much broader, much more liberal than our law here. Canada and California both have about 40 million people population. Both laws were passed around June, July 2016. Last year in Canada, 10,000 people died using the law. As Janet said, in California, 485 people died using the law. There's been a lot of criticism now because people think there's too many people dying. But if you think about it, how many people die every year, how many people die a bad death, and these people died a good death. The other ironic thing to me is we think that religion is one of the great opponents of assisted dying. In Canada, Quebec is I think Google says 68% of people identify as Catholics in Quebec. It's not been known as a liberal state. Sorry, my shoulder keeps disappearing here. But they have the highest percentage of usage of the law in Quebec. And they passed their law a year before 2016, when the whole country passed the law. Their utilization in some parts of Quebec is 8.3% and 8.1% of people who die use medical aid in dying. That is astonishing. In Quebec, generally, it's about 7%. British Columbia was the leader with 5%. In our country, it's 0.1% in all the jurisdictions that have medical aid in dying, which means to me that some people are dying a bad death and some people cannot access medical aid in dying for many reasons. So their conclusion is open discussion about MAID combined with good access to MAID services lead to more people being able to choose an assisted death. Yay.
Faye, I hate to interrupt, but I'm wondering if time is becoming a factor here. We
Sure.
are about 20 minutes to the end of our meeting, and I'm
Let's
wondering
open to questions.
if it wouldn't be better to open. That's a good
That's
point
fine.
to finish on, and maybe a good time to open for questions. So if there are any additional questions that are in the chat box, perhaps Lee, could you check and see if there are any additional chat questions in the chat box? If not, then we'd be happy to take people who raise their hand and try and respond to whatever additional questions they might have.
The only question, Monique Karen asks, what was the answer to the question about going to another country? And this occurred during Janet's discussion. I know I'm going back a little bit, but I just.
Switzerland is the only country you can go to.
And now in the United States, Oregon, you do not have to be a resident of Oregon. So
It's
people from
really important. Keep
Yeah.
talking about that.
So that was a huge change in the law because now people from all over the United States can go to Oregon. I think they still have, though, the 2-week wait between the first and second verbal request. So you have to be prepared to go and stay a while. But then you can also leave the state, right? You can go back to home with the medication and utilize it at home. You do not have to stay in Oregon to utilize it, do you?
I don't know. Never thought the residence requirements between the states were very serious. Brittany Maynard went from California before the law changed here to Oregon and got a peaceful death. She used medical aid in dying. And the residence requirements are very trivial. Most places, like if you have a rent receipt, Brittany Maynard and her family rented a house. So they presented the rent receipt as proof of residency. That's all. So they're not very stringent, but this court decision that says anybody can use the law in Oregon has made the law almost universal in this country, if you have the money to do that.
And then outside of the United States, as Faye said, the only country that you don't have to be a resident is Switzerland. All the other countries, you have to be a resident of their country.
In Canada, it's not residency as much as you're a member of the health service.
Right.
And many people criticize the United States for trying to pass a medical aid in dying law without changing our health system so that it's equitable to everybody, which is a very good point, I think. Here's
The last question on chat is from Fran Alborg. It seems that the state laws are all about a patient taking pills. Is there any state where the physician can give an injection like in Canada?
No.
No, they all have to be introduced somewhere throughout the GI tract. So people either have to be able to swallow it. For somebody who may have a thing called a PEG tube, which goes directly into your GI tract, or they can have a nasogastric tube placed and the medication can be introduced that way, but they still have to self-administer. So they have to push a plunger to be able to to introduce the medication. It can also be introduced rectally. They have to have an enema first and then a rectal tube placed. And again, the patient has to push the plunger. So no, the United States does not have IV administration available anywhere.
Barry, we got 2 more. Would you like me to read them?
I want to say a plug for, I want to put this on my slideshow. ACA MAID is a is a mostly California organization headed by Lonnie Shavelson. Please see our website for his talk that he gave to Hemlock Society of San Diego, 4 or 5 months, 6 months ago. ACA MAID is having their national convention in Portland in a couple of weeks. Again, Janet Christie and I will go. And that deals with all the ways of administering, what to administer. They've standardized what you get when you ingest this stuff. Bitter tasting stuff takes a long time to die, but they've tried to make it much better. They don't want to expand the law. They just want to make the law usable for more people. ACA MAID, you can look it up on Google.
There is a question here. I'm not sure it's been asked, but I'll read it. It says really kind of a comment more than any question, but when U.S. Catholic women were found to be getting abortions, that's when the U.S. Catholic Conference started their anti-abortion campaign. So expect the Catholic Church, I think is what this question meant to say. So expect the Catholic Church to be very much engaged in fighting the autonomy of one's choice of how to die. And of course, that's already in progress. One of the main opponents of medical aid in dying legislation in virtually all the states, certainly in California, is the Catholic Church. Maybe the most powerful force in opposition, certainly one of the most powerful forces.
And they fund the disabled community too. But see, it's not that way in Quebec. So I wrote to CAMAP the other day and said, how is it that if 67% of the people in Quebec identify as Catholic, that you can have such liberal laws passed? And somebody wrote back and said, we have a principle called eat the Pope, which essentially means I'm a good Catholic and I cross myself and I go to Sunday services, but I do whatever I want to. And if I want an abortion or a divorce or whatever, aid in dying, I just do it. That's called.
And we've seen countries with large Catholic populations that have been able to get medical aid in dying, or whatever their terminology that they use in their country. So it's possible, but they are definitely a strong opponent.
Would you like, do we have time for me to read there? Two new questions just came in. Tell me what you'd
Sure.
like.
Here, go ahead, Lee, and read.
We have
those.
a raised hand also.
Okay. Emmy Garnica writes, how many members are in San Diego Hemlock Society? What efforts are made to grow the number?
I guess I can answer that. I just saw some figures on it. We had at the end of last year about 320 members, I believe, something right close to that. And what do we do to grow the membership? Well, we do everything we can think of. We wish we had more resources to do that. One of the things I've always thought is we know from public opinion polls that there are very large percentages of Californians who believe in what we believe in and who want what we want. But one has to be able to reach out to these people and in some way have public relations campaign in some sense that motivates these people to get involved, join groups like our own, and begin to pressure their legislature. We're attempting to do some of that work with a better exit, and we hope that pays off. But really, we need more outreach, and we wish we had some good ideas. We do have some ideas, but if you have some great ideas about what we might do, please feel free to get in contact with us and let us know your thoughts on that.
Right. And as I brought up in my presentation, I challenge each of us that are here to bring people to membership, if you have people that you talk to about these issues and they're like-minded and they're not members, ask them to become members, suggest that they become members.
I speak to
Very
a lot more.
inexpensive.
I will speak to anybody. I mean, less than 10 people is not sort of a waste of time, but I am happy to speak to anybody, and I have spoken, and I spoke on Friday and Saturday, and and I think Janet will eventually too, and Christy, and I think there are a lot of people here who can talk about what Hemlock does and what the whole movement is about, because to me, the most tragic thing is, and I see it in my retirement community all the time, that people die without even knowing what their options are. And it's been very difficult for me to get a platform here, even though I am speaking at White Sands in a week or so, and they have a whole program, 5 series on what you should know at the end of life, but not at my retirement community. We will speak any year, garden clubs, whatever.
Can we get a copy of Janet's slides?
I don't know how we do that. Now, this is being recorded, so you can see that you can go to our website eventually and it will be available there. And I'm happy to share my slides. Somebody that is more technologically savvy than I am I can send them as PDFs to somebody, but yes.
Send them to Pam, and then people can.
Hemlock Society requesting them, and we'll look into getting them to you.
Yeah.
Any other questions you see, Lee?
Galaxy tab, whatever.
Rest or comments. So go ahead.
Had his hand up forever.
You got a hand.
Oh, that's me. Hi, Faye. This is Joe Casciani. I don't know if you can see me.
Joe.
Hi.
Hi.
And Audrey is here with me, my
Joe
wife.
for years.
Thanks. I just want to say hi and thanks to you and Janet for the presentation today. We've known each other a long time. I think you're doing such a great job, and I just want to send gold stars to you for being such a strong advocate. This is so important, and I'd love to have you back on my podcast whenever you want. I got another platform for you, so happy to do that.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, Joe's a psychologist. We were psychologists together, and he does actually a program here at the V retirement community on living to 100. And we've argued about that. Is that a good thing or not a good thing? And if you're going to live to 100, then you should definitely know your ways out.
Yeah, thanks.
It's a very positive program that he does.
Yeah, thanks. So let me get in touch with you. We'll find a way to get you back on the podcast. And keep up the good work. Thank you.
Too, Joe.
Any other questions you see, Lee?
No, the rest are all comments.
Okay, yeah, I've seen several comments, and actually, without mentioning any in particular, many of them were comments like those, just like that comment just made, really just giving Hemlock a pat on the back for the kind of work that we're doing, and we appreciate those pats on the back, and we hope you'll, if you're not a member, you'll join us as a member, and if you are a member, you'll support us in any way you can. We can use volunteers. We also, as I said, we rely on memberships, and we also rely upon donations from folks. Over the years, Hemlock has been able to survive financially, mainly based on the generosity of people who have left significant contributions to us when they died. And so think of us when you're writing your will, and hopefully you'll be able to find some way to contribute to our organization and the effort that we're making.
Here's a hand up. And also I made this slide. It's a very complicated slide, but I was trying to talk about our penetration into the world. And actually, it's very low, and most people in the world don't have formal medical aid in dying. They probably have sympathetic doctors who just do it. That's my impression. In fact, when I go to a small town to talk, I hesitate because probably the doctors already do it, and they don't want to get involved in litigation and legislation and everything else. Anybody want to see this thing? It's complicated. It's 1 star if we have an organization there, if there's a member of the World Right to Die Society, like Zimbabwe and South Africa. In Africa, although there's no MAID legislation there. Same thing in Asia. We now have an organization in Korea and Japan we've had, of course, and no legislation. The Middle East, we have a strong organization in Israel, but forget Israel because you can't do anything there because of the Orthodox. For some reason, we have no legislation and only one organization in Scandinavia, which makes me think that the doctors there do it because Scandinavians are very smart and assertive, and no one seems to even form a Right to Die organization. So it seems to me that they must have things taken care of there. Nothing in Eastern Europe. Central and South America, Colombia, of course, Janet mentioned. And Uruguay, there's not an organization, or there's forming there, one is forming there, but in the courts, when somebody is brought before the court because they help somebody die, they're usually acquitted because they go into the reasons and all that kind of thing. In Oceania, of course, we have Australia and New Zealand, both have right to die laws. What's happening in Australia now is that 2 territories, they're trying to get the law back. The first law in the world that it was ever passed and used was in the Northern Territory of Australia. That was in 1996. 4 people died under the law. Philip Nitschke was the doctor that helped them die. And a very courageous prime minister, Marshall Perrin, introduced the law. And the first person that died there was Bob Den, a Buddhist. I just want to mention all those names because all of us are still involved in the Right to Die movement. Marshall's involved, Philip Nitschke's involved, Bob Den's widow, Judy, is involved. This is something, once you get passionate about it, you stay pretty passionate. But so Australia is working now on the 2 territories, which is the Northern Territory and the capital area territory. In America, we only have 10 of 50 states in this really restrictive law. We could certainly do better. Canada has done very much better. Mexico has an organization, but of course, not a law. In Europe is where most of the laws are. So Switzerland, of course, although it's self-administration, well, except Pegasus now permits infusions. Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg have the most liberal laws and have had them for the longest time. Germany has hesitated to pass a law. It is now a court decision that it can be, medical aid in dying can be administered in Germany. No regulations yet. And Spain, a Catholic country, had now passed a law France does not have a law. The UK does not have a law. Italy does not have a law. And they have strong organizations and a lot of public support, but no laws, which is a disgrace. The World Federation does not particularly encourage extra legal innovations. Kevorkian was not a darling of the World Federation. He was my darling. I loved the man. Nor is Philip Nitschke, who believes in having anybody have access to medical aid in dying, which I haven't come to that point yet myself. Final Exit Network is sort of an extra legal organization, very popular, very well financed because people are very grateful for it, where they teach people how to end their own lives, usually by the inhalation of inert gas. New Tech is this organization which we have tried for how many years, God, 20 years, and we have succeeded in finding new ways of self-deliverance. And actually self-deliverance itself is not a popular method that the World Federation necessarily endorses. But the World Federation has made great strides and held us all together. And their website is very good. And so that's what that is. So that's all. The very patient Pat waiting up here with her hand up.
Oh, well, you kind of addressed it when, well, part of it when you mentioned Dr. Kevorkian. And I was wondering, because I'm from Michigan, and so was actually Fran Ellenberg. And we just remember him going to prison for like, I believe it was eight years. The judge and prosecutor were on some sort of a SAID or something. So I was just wondering, I don't remember any particular organization, at least we didn't know of any at that time. So I was wondering, where did the Hemlock Society fit into Dr. Kevorkian? Because I don't remember seeing anything about them.
Thank you. We're the only Right to Die organization that supported Kevorkian. We raised $28,000 for his legal defense. I was the only Right to Die person at his trial, and I was there during the whole trial.
Oh, wow.
I wrote a little play. We'll have to do a little play one of these days called St. Peter versus Jack Kevorkian. But the other Right to Die organizations didn't really want to have anything to do with him because his persona, presumably among the public, was not a good image of a doctor. I did not feel that way, and nor did the statistics show that at his height of popularity, 75% of people in the United States and actually in the world, because he's the only Right to Die person that's known around the world, supported the Right to Die, because every case that he did, he made public why this person was asking to die, how they died. And in 3 out of 4 cases where he was tried, he was acquitted.
Right.
And he had Jeffrey Feiger. You may remember Jeffrey Feiger, Pat. He was not from Michigan, but he was Kevorkian's lawyer, who was very good, except in the last case, Kevorkian was his own lawyer.
Yes.
I could spend a whole hour talking about his trial and talking about him, but some other time we will, because he should not be forgotten. And many young people do not know who Jack Kevorkian was. And he made a big difference in how people saw the Right to Die. Thank you for asking about my favorite doctor.
Yes, thank you.
We're
So-
at our
yes.
3 o'clock timeline for the end of our meeting, and we've had wonderful questions and certainly a lot of great information presented by both Faye and Janet, and some of the people who have commented and asked questions have added information as well. We typically end the meeting at 3. If there's maybe just one final question that somebody might want to ask.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify about Kevorkian. You said he was cleared. How did he end up in jail?
No.
he wasn't.
He was found
The last
guilty.
time was-
He was
got-
found.
Yeah,
He was found guilty.
yeah.
So,
He was 8 years, at least 8 years in prison.
Yeah.
but there were several cases, and then he was found guilty on one case, or how did that work out?
No, he was found guilty of helping or providing suicide for Tom Yauk. And he did it by giving a lethal injection because Tom Yauk was so far gone with ALS that he could not even swallow. He had hospice care. In fact, Hemlock contributed to their hospice because he got such good care. But at the end, he wanted to die, and he was so immobilized that Kevorkian gave him a lethal injection, which was okay, happens every day. But Kevorkian taped it, sent it to Mike Wallace, who was an alumna of the University of Michigan. Mike Wallace showed it on 60 Minutes with Kevorkian there. Some of you may have seen it. And that was the evidence that was presented in court. I mean, how can you dispute that? There he was giving Tom Yock a lethal injection. Tom Yock fought to stay alive. He was a race car driver. He had his race car all outfitted with special equipment so he could use it up until the very end. I got to know his wife, Melody, very well. His brother was there, Terry. His parents agreed, not Kevorkian's parents, not Tom Yock's parents, you know, that he was had a much better death than he would have had otherwise. And
So in other words, what I'm asking is the previous times he did it, he was acquitted because the person did it themselves. He helped instead of him injecting them directly. Was that the difference?
no, not, well, yes, I guess so. There were 3 trials in which he was acquitted, actually 4 cases. And because he had Jeff Feiger, I think Jeff could make the case, you know, these people were suffering, and Jeff was a very good lawyer, and the jury, one minister was the head of one of the juries and made a statement about why they acquitted him. But without Jeff Feiger, and he was his own lawyer, and he had an advisor who had been trained by Jeff but really didn't know anything, but he was only an advisor. And anyway, C. Kevorkian wanted to be convicted so he could appeal to the Supreme Court, which he did. And of course, they turned him down. So Jessica Cooper was the lawyer in the case. And she had already been, I mean, the judge, she had already been the judge in one case where he was acquitted. And she was angling for a position on the Court of Appeal in Michigan, which she now has, because she gave him the maximum sentence. She could have given him probation. She gave him 10 to 25, of which he served 8 years. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fascinating story. Well, thank you all so much for coming to our meeting, joining us in our meeting, and thank you, Faye and Janet. And we hope to see you soon. 2 months from now, we'll be having another meeting, and we're going to be looking at taking again a closer look at voluntary stopping of eating and drinking, a topic that there's always new information coming out on. So we hope you'll join us for that meeting. Keep your eye on our communications, and hopefully we'll see you then. With no
barrier, can we stay, talk to people?
Pardon?
We have to sign off, or can we stay and talk to people?
I guess you can stay as long as you want, Faye. I think but you know, I think anybody else who
okay. Barry, you mentioned about donations. Is there a yearly membership fee? I didn't quite get that.
Our annual membership fee is $35, and our membership year goes from January to December. And you can join our organization by simply going to our web page, and there's an opportunity there to send your.
Oh yeah, I'm already joined, but I didn't know that there was a yearly.
Yeah, well, you can have, some people have a life membership. You can get a life membership that, of course, doesn't require renewing every year.
Okay, thank you. I thought so. I had something like that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to close the meeting, or I'll let Faye close the meeting. Maybe I'll leave Faye to close the meeting. If she wants to stay and answer and talk with people, that's wonderful.
I love to talk to people.
Okay, well, I'll let you close the meeting then, Faye.
Okay.
All right. Thanks again for such a wonderful job.
When there's no people to talk to, then I'll happy to go off.
Okay. All right.
This is hanging out at the World Federation.
Well, thanks, but I gotta go. I'd love to talk more. Thank you. It was great.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Who was just about to talk to me? Was it Fran? No. Anyway, just say what you have to say. Unmute yourself. if nobody has anything to say.
Hi, Faye, can you hear me? This is Heidi Rataj. I'm going to try to get on camera here. I don't know if you can you hear me okay?
I can.
I am, so I'm at UCSD Design Lab, and I actually tried to design an advanced care planning chatbot for patients, and some of the research that, some of the positive research from healthcare providers was that they were open to it. They could see it as adjunct. What I recognize though is that I feel like the conversation really needs to move towards health advocates, in particular women like myself, who tend to live longer, and they pick up these wonderful things called comorbidities along the way. And I've had now the privilege of being with two people as they died, my father and my father-in-law. And my father-in-law, it wasn't very pleasant. And I used to be in the communication business. So my question is, I have seen also a really terrific group, although I haven't heard this level of conversation. It's called End Well. I'm sure you're in concert or talking with Dr. Shoshana Ungeleiter. But I would be curious to see. Well, I'd be curious to see, first of all, their panel of thinkers, critical thinkers in this space are very, very good. I'd love to see you on that panel.
I'd love to be on.
And second, I'd love to hear this level of conversation, because I'm with you. Again, longevity science, coming from a gerontology background, I want to design End Well right. I'd like to see that we push this as aggressively as we can and try to highlight what it really looks like, mostly in the hospital and at home. And I'm sure you read the piece of the New York Times of the woman who was a very, very strong advocate who was able to almost get what she wanted, but there were all these gaps in pockets, gaps in terms of healthcare teams that her friends were able to step up and help her, and tremendous amount of gaps in terms of the finances, as you know, from the hospice side. So this story to me is so incredibly compelling, and because it gets to affect everybody if you're lucky enough. And so I'm just curious of you know, what we can do. I mean, I would be open to seeing where we could run some design workshops using human-centered design to explore this conversation. I would love to see more multi-generational people having this conversation, because it's, to me, one of the most important that we can have.
Yay. You can reach me at the Hemlock Society's email.
Okay.
I could put I don't know how to put my address in there somewhere, but just through the Hemlock Society, and we get together and talk about this, because it sounds wonderful.
Excellent. I look forward to it. I'm so grateful that I'm a member, and I want to continue to be a member. This is my first time being able to join the conversation, although one of your colleagues was extremely helpful for another friend of mine who was in stage 4, just in terms of some of the resources. So I thank you for that, and I'd look forward to connecting with you.
So always glad to hear that we're helpful. That's really wonderful. Yes, I will definitely contact you or something.
Hey, I have a question. Oh, are you finished? I'm sorry. I thought you were finished. Go ahead.
I am. Thank you. I'm just turning off. My apologies.
No problem at all. I wanted to ask you, I was very taken by the letter that was included in the recent email from Hemlock Society about the woman who had such a difficult time being able to pursue death with dignity, even with the law. And do you have any insights on how to prevent the kind of disruptive, unhelpful behavior she received from the medical industry originally, even though she qualified?
You know, it's very hard to die using the law. It's very hard to die without using the law. It's just not simple. And the medical establishment has not been helpful. I subscribe to JAMA and the New England Journal and all these things. You never see articles about assisted dying. It's never discussed at UCSD Medical School. It's just not discussed. And there are very few doctors that are willing to help. If you need a doctor, Kaiser will do it. UCSD will provide a doctor. I'm not sure about Scripps where I belong. I don't really know. And ACA Made, I have to say that again, and if I could write it down for you, I would. ACA Made is very good. It has a website for only people who are eligible for the law to find a doctor. And that's the trouble, because the law is way too narrow, as Janet has pointed out so eloquently. I'm tempted myself to go switch back to Kaiser, where I was a member at one time, because again, if you qualify for the law, so if you're terminally ill and competent and can swallow, they will connect with the doctor. But that's too difficult. So there are a lot of books on how to kill yourself. And of course, Final Exit, Derek's book, is probably among the best. And there's a 2020 digital edition. The last edition, I think, was, I can't remember, but the third edition is available. Generally not in libraries, because people check them out and then somehow fail to return them. But anyway, it's available on Amazon, Final Exit. And then Philip Nitschke has lots of ways. He has the Peaceful Pill Handbook, which is quite expensive, but he has an e-handbook in which a lot of people subscribe, and people contribute ideas from all over the world. So that's helpful. I love Philip. We have Philip on one of our programs that you can see him on our website, but he often advertises things that just don't pan out. So I have to commend him. He and I have been in this movement for a long, long time. And he's two things that I admire very much, gutsy and courageous, and same thing. Not all the information is correct and helpful. So just be careful.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm a resident at a retirement community up in Carlsbad, and I was interested in the possibility of getting a speaker to come and talk to us. As a resident, I'm not the one who, can.
I talked to the one. I talked to her. She said, "Sure, come." And I haven't. I can't remember. We had a little booth outside when there was something going on there in Carlsbad. Is Carlsbad by the sea is where you are?
No, I'm at La Costa Glen.
Oh, La Costa Glen. Oh,
I'm
yeah.
I'm La Costa Glen. I actually sent an email to the speakers, back in August, never got a response. So I'm wondering, I let it drop, but, should I just write again?
No, I'm happy to speak at La Costa Glen. We have members there. Who's talking anyway?
I'm Sharon Sachs.
Okay. And you're a member, right, Sharon?
Not yet. I'm going to be as soon as I hang up here.
Okay. Yeah, you can reach me through the Hemlock website or Hemlock email.
Mm-hmm.
If I can reach you that way, then we can definitely arrange.
Yeah, and if Faye's not available, Sharon, myself and Christy Golem, one of our other board members, also are available to come and give a presentation. So please reach out to us again. I'm sorry that you didn't get a response back earlier.
So there's no individual to, just use the general email for Hemlock Society.
Yeah.
That's the one I use.
Yeah, whomever of us is available will be happy to speak.
Great, thank you.
Is that Linda? Yes. Hi, Linda.
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
It's neat to see you again, Faye.
Nice to see you.
I just heard Kaiser mentioned in a way that I've never heard it mentioned before. I've been a Kaiser patient for probably 50 years. With a number of three of my doctors have retired, so I'm on a fourth one now. Are they? Could you elaborate a little bit? I didn't realize that they were perhaps more.
Kaiser has been, when advanced directives first came out, Kaiser was very cooperative in telling patients about that. But when the law, I don't know when the law passed, well, maybe not then, but the system I understand at Kaiser, and if somebody can correct me, that's fine. That is, if you, first of all, everybody should talk to their doctors, their own doctors, anywhere, and see what they think about using the law. And then if they walk out on you, you might go elsewhere. But at Kaiser, if you qualify, essentially, you're pretty sick and you're at the end of the rope and you want to end your life, and you've heard maybe about the End of Life Option Act, and you talk to your doctor about it, and your doctor says, no, I'm not going to do it. I just don't believe in it or whatever. But I will refer you to our navigator here in San Diego. I used to know her name, but I can't remember anymore. I think now there's 2 people who do it. That navigator will refer you to a doctor at Kaiser who will do it. And it doesn't cost anything, including the medication. And really, that is wonderful
Which
because
is very, very unique to Kaiser.
I think so.
Yeah, out of all the systems, because it's not the case at UCSD, you will have
It's
to pay
not.
for the medication.
The medication. Well, that's even trivial compared to what you might have to pay if you use Dr. Bob. I have to mention Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob is a saint. Somebody on our board, Donnie Moore, works with Dr. Bob, but Dr. Bob charges. Some people say too much, but I wouldn't say that, but that's the way he makes a living. And he does a very good job of helping people use the law and also helping with VSED.
But one of the things that's a little tricky, Linda, is that you have to bring this up. It's not something, even people who are getting towards the end of their life, the physicians don't really offer medical aid in dying as an option unless you've asked for it. So yeah, you need to discuss it with your physician at Kaiser. And if and when you qualify, then they've got a nurse navigator that gets you to the providers, and you'll be one of the lucky ones who can utilize the law.
Probably not in the hospital, but probably at home. But anyway, yes.
Faye, this is Emmy Garnica.
Oh, Emily, where are you?
Emmy.
Yeah, Emmy.
Where am I? I'm in the upper left.
Oh, I see.
Just turned on my video. I'm the one who asked about how many people are members in San Diego. And
not enough is the answer.
I know one of the things that struck me as you were talking is that the whole movement seems so fragmented and unwell known. And by fragmented, I mean, how many different organizations did you mention, Faye?
I know.
And but because of that, and there's this aura of secrecy around it. I mean, I'm a Kaiser member, and I worked at Kaiser for 30 years. And I do know about this, partly because I'm in this organization. But what is the deal? Why is it so hard to talk about? Why is there so little kind of open knowledge about a topic that is so important to all of us? And I mean, I don't know what can be done about it. I know that I teach chair yoga here in Cardiff by the Sea, and I will talk to my class and may be able to get a time for you to come up and talk at the library where I teach. But I'm just sort of pondering this whole aspect of people don't know what's going on.
I had lunch with one of our 105-year-old residents here. And I said, by the way, we're having a Hemlock meeting next week or something. She said, I don't want to talk about that.
Our society does not do well with death. They don't like to talk about it. We are the exceptions that seem to want to discuss it and try to improve people's deaths. So Emmy, you're in Cardiff, because I live in Cardiff.
Oh yeah. Okay. Hi, Janet.
Hi.
So I teach at the Cardiff Library.
Oh my gosh. I knew Emmy's mother, who was
they knew my mother. So we go way back.
KPBS, yes.
But it is a very secretive thing. I mean, the physicians who write prescriptions for medical aid in dying are quite secretive, and that's why, you know, the American Clinicians Academy for Medical Aid in Dying has a patient to physician portal where they will find you a physician that participates. But those physicians don't really want their names provided otherwise outside of that end of life California end of life choices. End of Life Choices California. They do the same thing. They will provide patients with a physician that's a prescriber to be assessed. So, but and I've actually tried to collaborate with other end of life organizations, and my approaches have not been received well. They do not tend to want to collaborate on things.
And the interesting thing to me is all these support groups for people who have horrible illnesses. I remember during the AIDS epidemic, there was always Live with AIDS support groups, and there are ALS support groups and Alzheimer's support groups. Will they talk about dying? No way. No way. And we're all going to die, but especially if you have these horrible diseases. But they don't know their options. I don't know. I don't understand it. I'm probably the most unpopular person to have dinner with at the V, because I bring it up at every dinner. And people shake their heads and they agree totally and then change the subject. But at least people know where I stand and they can find me if they need me, which often they do. And often they don't.
Years ago, I had somebody come from the San Diego Memorial Society to talk to my group, my yoga students. It was very well received. So I think I live in a
I love to talk about when you're
strange
dead.
world. What?
I love to talk about when you're dead. People talk about that all the time. What kind of funerals they have, and what kind of cemeteries, and do they want to be composted, and do they want to do body? People love to talk about that. But
So
getting
you
dead
think this is really different? Well, I'm going to try it on for size and see what happens.
Yeah.
I'll let you know.
Yes, do. Always glad to see you again anyway, Amy.
It's nice to see you, Faye.
Anyone else have anything they want to?
Yeah, this is Pat. I just wanted to give a plug for the SB 380, which says that healthcare entities, all healthcare entities, should post on their website their policy regarding the End of Life Option Act. Almost none of them have, but I'm happy to say that both UCSD and Kaiser have their full policy. It's a very nice policy posted on their website, and I put the URL of Kaiser's policy in the chat if anyone wants to look at it.
And the nice thing is not only do they have policies, but they actually have the systems in place to end up being providers.
Yes, yes. And there's a few hospices that post that they do participate in End of Life Option Act. Their policies aren't nearly as developed as UCSD's or Kaiser's, but we have a list on the website, on the Hemlock website. You can find it. Very few.
Amazing work trying to get hospices especially to say whether will they do it or won't they do it, and in the process has uncovered some very sinister, I think, things about hospices that are now confirmed in the New Yorker article of November 28th, which I recommend to all of you. It was shocking to see how much corruption there is in the hospice system. I mean, we think of hospice as a very benign organization, and generally it is, but there are really bad things that go on. And when Pat was doing her research, she found that some hospices maybe had a phone number, but had no physical presence, and it wasn't clear who was sponsoring them. Most of these are for-profit hospices. Not all for-profit hospices are bad, but if they're bad, they tend to be for-profit hospices. So it's worth a good recommendation for somebody.
It's also big business these days. There are a lot of private equity companies getting into hospice. It's very sad.
Very sad. And even National Hospice Association agrees with this, that you have to be very careful these days. It's sort of like free money. You know, they get money for taking people and administering some cursory care 2 hours a week or something like that. So they're taking people who are not eligible really for hospice, giving inadequate care. in unqualified people. Not good. Pulling people in who should not be eligible for hospice, but they can get payments for. Not good.
Pat, you mentioned that Kaiser and UCSD do comply with Senate Bill 380 by providing information on their websites regarding their policies on California MAID, but Sharp-Reed-Steele and Scripps do not. I actually just checked last week. What can we do about that? I'm with Sharp-Reed-Steele. I do plan on talking with my doctor the next time I have an appointment, but you know, I doubt it's going to do any good. But what can we do? I mean, isn't this a violation of law?
Theoretically, yes, but we have heard that the California Public Health Licensing Bureau has no interest in trying to enforce this law. So I think it's just going to be a matter of public opinion. So what I would like people to do that visit these facilities is, like Janet was saying earlier, be loud. Every time you're there, tell the admin people, tell the doctors, why don't you have your policy on your website? I mean, that's the only idea I have, because there seems to be a real reluctance to post their policy.
Yeah, you know, when you started your reply to me just now, there was an interruption and I didn't hear what you said about something about California Public Health Department.
Yeah, the California Public Health Department, which licenses hospice, is one of the licensing agencies, but we have heard through the grapevine that they have no interest whatsoever in trying to enforce this law or provide any penalties for not complying. And they honestly don't seem to have any interest whatsoever to talking to people on the phone about it. I've called them several times, and you know, you get the runaround or people don't even call you back. So if you have any ideas, I would love to hear them.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. I'll certainly give it some thought. Aside from just talking to my doctor, which I don't think is going to help.
No.
I talked to my doctor at Scripps, talked to two doctors, and neither one of them had ever heard of the law or anything about Scripps's position. So I called the administrator at Scripps, or an administrator, and I said, what is your position? My doctors don't seem to know anything about it. And they said, oh no, we've had training on it and everything. And I said, are you implying that my doctors are stupid? Because they're no. So I don't know what the answer is at Scripps. I don't know. We had a speaker from Scripps, and she said, when people inquire, we tell them every option. And I said, do you tell them about aid and dying? No, they have to ask about that. I don't know. I've never seen a lecture at UCSD or at Scripps or the Institute of Aging has anything to do with assisted dying. I don't know.
Anyone else have anything you want to discuss, or shall we call it a wrap?
It's lovely to see all of you. I'm
Yes, it
so
is.
glad to see people that I haven't seen, like Linda, for a long time, and Emmy. Oh gosh, this is really wonderful. And Pat, I don't see her nearly enough. So, and I don't see her now either, but
I think she's left. So
No, I'm here. I'm never visible.
always in the shadows.
I'm a shy person.
She is, but she's very effective.
well, thank you everyone for attending and for being attentive and for your questions and your comments. We appreciate you participating, and we appreciate your support and your membership. And we will see you at our next meeting.
Aren't you happy
Thank-
to have a young person like Janet around when there's just old people like me? you know?
Oh, I'm so
We
grateful to be
love
called young.
both. We love both.
Yes.
Janet is awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
See you
Bye.
next
Bye,
time.
everybody.
Bye-bye.